Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perek Chet Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. To establish an Eruvei Chatzerot in a courtyard where idolaters live as well, the Jewish residents need to rent the rights of the idolatrous residents. As we learned earlier in chapter 6, Mishnah 1, the sages wanted to discourage Jews living in the same courtyard as non-Jews, as idolaters. In addition, all the Jewish residents must contribute to the Eruv. Now, this Mishnah discusses whether these two requirements apply to residents who left the courtyard for Shabbat. Hameniach beto v'alach lishbot be'ir acheret. If a person left his house and went to spend Shabbat in another town, echad nochi ve'echad Yisrael, whether that person is an idolater who did not rent his rights to the Jewish residents, or a Jew who did not contribute to the Eruv, harei ze oser, he forbids the remaining residents from carrying, because he is considered a resident of the courtyard even while he is out of town. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Now, the commentators explain, Rabbi Meir holds that a residence without owners present on Shabbat is treated like an occupied residence, and therefore if one of the Jewish residents left town for Shabbat, he must contribute bread to his courtyard zeruv anyway, and if a resident who was an idolater left town, his rights in the courtyard must be rented by the Jewish residents. Rabbi Yehuda Omer eno oser. Rabbi Yehuda says he does not forbid them from carrying. Only those who are actually present in the courtyard on Shabbat are considered courtyard residents. And the commentators explain, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a residence without owners present on Shabbat is not treated like an occupied residence, and therefore the Eruv is valid even without the participation of those who left town for Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Nochri oser Yisrael eno oser. An idolatrous resident who left town forbids the Jewish residents from carrying unless they rented his rights, but a Jewish resident who left town without contributing to the Eruv does not forbid the residents from carrying. Shenderech Yisrael avo b'Shabbat, for it is not usual for a Jew to return home on Shabbat if he was out of town when Shabbat began. And the commentators explain, Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that if someone is away from home for an entire Shabbat, he does not need to participate in his courtyard zeruv for that Shabbat. Since a Jewish person who leaves town for Shabbat usually returns only after Shabbat is over, he does not forbid the residents of his courtyard from carrying if he failed to contribute to the Eruv. But an idolater who leaves town for Shabbat might well return on Shabbat itself. Since it's unknown whether he will be away for the entire Shabbat, he does forbid the Jewish residents from carrying unless they rented his courtyard rights. And the Rav does say, Balachak Rabbi Yossi, the Rav follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Now, before we continue with the Mishnah so far quoted three opinions who ruled on whether a Jewish person who leaves town for Shabbat must participate in the Eruv of his courtyard. Now, since these opinions do not mention a case of someone who merely leaves the courtyard but stays in town, this implies that such a person must surely participate in the Eruv, since he could conceivably return on Shabbat. The Mishnah now is going to quote Rabbi Shimon, who rules more leniently even in that case, the most lenient view so far. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Afilu iniach beto v'alach lishbot etzel bito be'otah ha'ir. Even if a Jew left his house and went to spend Shabbat with his daughter in that same city, eno oser, he does not forbid the residents from carrying, shekvar isiya milibo, for he has already dismissed from his mind any thought of returning. Now, Rabbi Shimon agrees that someone who is away from home for an entire Shabbat does not forbid the other residents from carrying, and takes this one step further than Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. They permit the other residents to carry only if the Jewish resident left town for Shabbat, since it's then unlikely that he will return on Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon permits carrying even if the Jewish resident stayed in town at his daughter's home, since then too it's unlikely that he will leave his daughter's home on Shabbat and return. The Rav does say that if, however, he went to his married son's home, Rabbi Shimon is concerned that a possible disagreement with his daughter-in-law might force him to leave, and he therefore does not entirely dismiss the possibility of returning home on Shabbat and would forbid the other residents from carrying. The whole case of Rabbi Shimon was when he left his house and went to spend Shabbat with his daughter in that same city. And the Rav does say, Rabbi Shimon, the Halacha follows Rabbi Yossi regarding the idolatrous resident who left town, that he forbids the Jewish residents from carrying unless they rented his rights, and that Rabbi Shimon, that even if a Jew left his house and went to spend Shabbat with his daughter in that same city, he does not forbid the residents from carrying. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Hey. Now, the rest of this chapter discusses the procedures for drawing or disposing of water in the courtyard on Shabbat. Mishnah Vav now discusses two adjoining courtyards separated by a wall. Each courtyard has its own eruv, but the two have not joined in a common eruv. Now, several views are cited as to what must be done before water may be drawn from a water cistern that is within both courtyards. Now, a cistern is a pool used to store water. The Mishnah discusses a cistern shared by two adjoining courtyards that are separated by a wall. Whoever can see it in the art's elucidated diagram brought in note 1 will be able to visualize the Mishnah. Let us begin. Bol sheben shte chatzerot. If a water cistern is shared by two courtyards and the wall that separates them passes over the top of the cistern, leaving part of the cistern in each courtyard, and memal'in mimenu b'Shabbat elei masulo mechitza gavo 10 tvachim. The residents of the courtyard may not fill a bucket of water from it on Shabbat unless they made another partition inside the cistern that is 10 tvachim high. And the commentators explain, since the courtyards did not join in an eruv, residents may not draw water from the other courtyard. When there is no noticeable separation within the cistern, the water drawn from anywhere in the cistern is viewed as having been drawn from both sides of the cistern. So the rabbis therefore required that a partition be placed in the cistern itself to divide it. Now, the Arts Elucidated Note 2 brings down the Mishnah Berurah in chapter 356, Seif Katan 3, that writes, although the wall between the courtyards passes over the cistern and it itself technically divides the cistern into two, still it was not made for the purpose of dividing the water, and a partition must therefore be installed. The Mishnah continues, ben milmala, ben milmata, ben mitoch ogno. The partition is valid whether most of it is above water, such as if 9 tefachim of the partition are above water and 1 tefach is under water, which would be diagram A, brought down in note 3 of the article elucidated. Right, so whether most of it is above water, whether most of it is below water, such as if 9 tefachim of the partition are underwater and 1 tefach of the partition is above water, or whether ben mitoch ogno, or whether it is entirely within the rim of the cistern and does not even reach the water. And the commentators explain, because of the pressing need to draw water on Shabbat, the rabbis relied on the legal principle, which is not ordinarily applicable to suspended partitions, known as gud achit. A partition which is viewed as extending downward beyond where it ends. So therefore it extends into the water and divides it. However, the rabbis allowed this leniency only when the partition is within the cistern, where it looks like it's separating the water. Now, although the partitions that we described do not totally seal off the waters of the two courtyards, which even an iron partition cannot do, still the rabbis instituted a special leniency permitting that water to be drawn as long as the waters of the two courtyards are noticeably separated from each other. This is how Tosfot explains it on page 86a in Masechet Eruvin. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Bet Shammai Omrim Milmata. Bet Shammai say 9 tefachim of the partition must be below water, so that the waters of the two courtyards are noticeably separated. However, the Rashba on page 86a does explain they agree that the top tefach must be above water, so that people standing near the cistern can see the separation. Bet Hillel Omrim Milmata, but Bet Hillel say 9 tefachim of the partition may be above water, and only 1 tefach need be below water. And the commentators explain, Bet Hillel permit even a partition, even a mechitza that is mostly above water, which looks like a separation, but they do require that at least 1 tefach be underwater, so that the residents will notice where the waters of their own courtyard end and not draw water directly from the other courtyard. According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, however, neither Bet Shammai nor Bet Hillel permit a partition that is completely above water, even if it's within the cistern rim, which the Tana Kama did say. We said ben mitoch ogno, whether it is entirely within the rim and does not even reach the water. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel does bring down, based off what he's writing, that neither Bet Shammai nor Bet Hillel permit a partition that's completely above water, even if it's within the cistern rim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Lo tiyeh mechitza gedola min hakotel shebenehem. A partition inside the cistern should not be more effective than the existing wall between the two courtyards that passes over the top of the cistern, meaning although the existing wall does not extend into the cistern itself, it nevertheless creates a legal separation between the courtyards, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says water may be drawn without any additional partition. Now, the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the previous opinions that we quoted, which was the Tana Kama and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, they depend on whether a suspended partition always creates a legal division between two courtyards with regards to the laws of Eruvin Chatzirot. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it does, and therefore, although the segment of wall passing over the cistern is suspended and does not enter the cistern, still illegally divides it two courtyards and no other partition is needed. The Tana Kama and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagree. They hold that a suspended partition does not create a legal division for a courtyard. Since the wall over the cistern is suspended, a partition must be made within the cistern itself. This how the Gemara explains it on page 86b, Masechet Eruvin. Nevertheless, they did permit a suspended partition in specific cases where it looks like it was installed to separate the waters. And the Rav does say, Ven alachak Rabbi Yehuda, the halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.